Florence Elizabeth Maybrick, aged 26, was indicted for having, on the 11th of May, feloniously, wilfully, and of her malice aforethought, killed and murdered one James Maybrick. So reads the indictment, copied into the record of St. George's Hall, Liverpool. In the summer of 1889, 2 words follow it in the transcript. 2 words, and nothing more. Not guilty. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. This is a case file, an indictment, a verdict, and a sentence, recorded in the proper order as the law requires. Yet the file itself begins not with a crime, but with a question that English law has rarely asked so plainly. What is a woman tried for when she is tried for murder? The record states the facts as established. Florence Elizabeth Chandler was born the 3rd of September 1862 in Mobile, Alabama, the daughter of a banker who served as the city's mayor. She married James Maybrick, a Liverpool cotton merchant, 23 years her senior, on the 27th of July, 1881, at St. James's Church, Piccadilly. The couple settled at Battlecrease House, Aigburth, a southern suburb of Liverpool, on the banks of the River Mersey, where coal smoke hung over the docks, and the omnibus carried clerks and merchants along the Aigburth Road each morning. James Maybrick died at Battlecrease House on the 11th of May 1889 after a sudden illness of some 15 days. His brothers deemed the circumstances suspicious. An inquest was convened. A coroner's jury returned a verdict of willful murder. Florence was arrested, charged, and brought before Mr. Justice Fitzjames Stephen at the Liverpool Assizes. This file will proceed as the court record proceeds, backward from judgment, through testimony, toward the morning it began. The deceased, James Maybrick, cotton merchant, born the 24th of October, 1838, in Liverpool, son of an engraver. He built, from modest beginnings, a trading house with offices in both Liverpool and Norfolk, Virginia, dividing his year between the two. By the standards of the record, he was a man of substance, respected on the cotton exchange, a member of established society, possessed of a fine residence and a comfortable income. The accused, born Florence Elizabeth Chandler, raised in considerable comfort. Her father, William George Chandler, had been a partner in a banking concern and a one-time mayor of Mobile, though he died before her birth. Her mother remarried to a German cavalry officer, Baron Adolf von Roix. Florence received the education proper to her station and was, by the testimony of those who knew her, lively and well regarded. The two met aboard a transatlantic steamer, the SS Baltic, in March of 1880, sailing from New York toward Liverpool. Maybrick, then 42, Florence not yet 19. Other passengers, the record notes, remarked upon the attentions paid to so young a lady by a man so much her senior. It is documented that Maybrick did not disclose to her, before the marriage, the full particulars of his history, namely, a long-standing arrangement with a woman named Sarah Ann Robertson, by whom he had several children, and a habit of taking arsenic and other tonics that had, by the time of his marriage, become deeply established. The legacy, it was said, of a bout of malarial fever contracted years earlier in Virginia. The marriage took place the following year. 2 children were born to the union, a son, James Chandler, known within the family as Bobo, in 1882, and a daughter, Gladys Evelyn, in 1886. The family moved in the early spring of 1888 to Battlecrease House itself, a substantial property of several acres, with gardens, ornamental trees, and a small stream running toward the Mersey. For a time, by all accounts, the household presented the appearance of respectability. Florence was noted in Liverpool society. The couple were seen at balls and at functions proper to their position. It is recorded that little survives among Mrs. Maybrick's possessions to indicate her private feelings during these years. What is recorded is this: that her husband's business required frequent absence, that his temperament was, by multiple accounts, given to gloom and hypochondria, and that the marriage, outwardly composed, concealed difficulties on both sides. Mark this point, for the record will return to it. By 1887, the household faced financial strain. Maybrick informed his wife that economies were required. Florence, raised to a different scale of living, is recorded to have incurred debts of her own, secured against her jewellery and concealed from her husband. The file now turns to the months preceding death, the period upon which the prosecution would later rest its case, and upon which the defence would mount its strongest challenge. It is established that James Maybrick was, for years before his final illness, a regular user of arsenic, strychnine, and other preparations, taken in doses that several witnesses at trial would describe as alarming. A Liverpool chemist confirmed under examination that he had supplied Maybrick with such substances over a considerable period. This fact, undisputed even by the prosecution, would prove material to everything that followed. The exact quantities he consumed and the precise state of his health by April of 1889 remain, in places, uncertain. It is also established that in the spring of 1888, knowledge came to Florence of her husband's long arrangement with Sarah Ann Robertson. Whether this knowledge altered her conduct, the record does not say with certainty. What the record does show, in the same period, Florence's name became associated with that of Alfred Brierly, a cotton broker and family friend with whom Maybrick himself had conducted business. On the 29th of March, 1889, following a visit to the Grand National at Aintree, a violent quarrel occurred between husband and wife, sufficiently severe that servants were obliged to intervene. Maybrick struck his wife, the record shows, and spoke of seeking a divorce. The wish, by several accounts, was mutual. Note this date. Note it again, for it recurs. Divorce in 1889, Britain was rare. Fewer than 5 unions in every 1,000 were dissolved by law, and for Florence it carried particular hazard. Under the financial arrangements then standing, she stood to be left with little, and to lose all claim upon her children. The couple, by mutual and uneasy agreement, resolved to continue as before. In mid-April, Florence purchased flypapers, common household items of the period, used to draw and kill flies, and containing, as was generally known, a quantity of arsenic. She was observed by her housekeeper Alice Yap, soaking these papers in a basin of water rather than setting them as intended. Florence stated this was to extract a wash for her complexion, arsenic-based cosmetic preparations being neither unusual nor, at that time, illegal to obtain by such means. On the 27th of April, James Maybrick fell seriously ill. Letters were exchanged between Florence and Alfred Brierly in this period, though their full contents were not entered into evidence. The household settled into a pattern repeated daily thereafter. The sick room, the nurse, the brothers gathering, the doctors called and recalled. Nothing improved. Nothing was explained. The file now records the events of the household between the 27th of April and the 11th of May, as later reconstructed for the coroner's court. Doctors attending James Maybrick diagnosed acute dyspepsia and prescribed accordingly. His condition did not improve. A nurse, Nurse Wilson, was engaged to attend him in the sick room. On the 8th of May, the housekeeper, Alice Yapp, intercepted a letter written by Florence to Alfred Brierly, intended for the afternoon post. Yapp did not post it. She read a portion of it and delivered it instead to Maybrick's brother, Edwin, then resident at Battlecrease House. On the 9th of May, a bottle of Valentine's meat juice, a tonic preparation common to the period, was observed by Nurse Wilson to have been handled by Mrs. Maybrick in the sick room. The nurse removed the bottle and conveyed it to Michael Maybrick, the deceased's eldest brother, who had by this point assumed effective direction of the household. The bottle was sent for analysis. It was found to contain a half grain of arsenic. From the 9th of May, Florence was, by the brother's direction, removed from the management of the sick room and confined to her own. Letters were no longer permitted to pass unread. The household, the record shows, had by this date concluded its own verdict before any court had convened. On the 10th of May, Florence was observed pouring her husband's prescribed medicine from a small bottle into a larger one. Questioned as to the reason, she stated it was easier to stir. The transferred medicine was itself analysed. No arsenic was found within it. That same day, a search of the house was conducted by Edwin and Michael Maybrick, together with family friends named Briggs, old acquaintances of the household. In a trunk belonging to Mrs. Maybrick, a chocolate box was discovered, containing a parcel labelled arsenic poison, with the words "for cats" appended beneath. A handkerchief, also found among her belongings, was later confirmed by analysis to bear traces of arsenic. Quantities of arsenic, gathered from various points about the house, were later found sufficient, by the prosecution's own estimate at trial, to have killed some 50 persons. A fact the defence would argue spoke more to a household of poor housekeeping than to a single act of murder. James Maybrick died at Battlecrease House on the 11th of May, 1889, at the age of 50. His brothers, dissatisfied, declined to permit a death certificate to be issued without further examination. The matter was referred to the coroner. A post-mortem examination was conducted in the days following death. The deceased's body was found to contain traces of arsenic, but, by the testimony entered at trial, only 1/10 of a grain, a quantity substantially below the 2 grains generally accepted as sufficient to cause death in a healthy adult. This finding would become the single most contested fact of the entire proceeding. The inquest, convened at a hotel near Aigburth, returned its verdict before the body's history had been fully reconstructed: willful murder against persons unknown. A verdict the coroner's jury would shortly amend to name Florence Maybrick directly. James Maybrick's body was subsequently exhumed from Anfield Cemetery for further examination, the original burial having taken place before the full extent of the suspicion was understood. Medical witnesses for the prosecution maintained that death had resulted from a prolonged course of arsenical administration, the final fatal episode beginning on the 27th of April. Medical witnesses for the defence, among them Dr. Frederick McNamara, maintained the contrary, that the appearance of the body was equally, perhaps better, explained by acute gastroenteritis, complicated by years of self-administered arsenic, strychnine, and other tonics, to which the deceased had grown so accustomed that his system could no longer be read as that of an unpoisoned man. It is recorded, and was acknowledged even by certain prosecution witnesses under cross-examination, that arsenic was, in the period, commonly regarded by some men as a tonic and a restorative, taken deliberately and in quantity by those who believed it improved the constitution. A Liverpool chemist's own ledger, produced at trial, confirmed regular sales of the substance to the deceased over a period of years. The jury was required to weigh a husband's long habit of self-poisoning against a wife's documented possession of the same substance, and to determine, from 1/10 of a grain, the cause of a man's death. If you're finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let's continue. Florence Maybrick was arrested on the 18th of May, 1889, and conveyed to Walton Gaol. She was questioned at length. On the 30th of May, her husband's body was exhumed for full forensic examination. On the 31st, before the coroner's court, the verdict of willful murder was formally directed against her by name. She was committed to stand trial at the Liverpool Assizes, charged with the murder of James Maybrick. The trial of Florence Elizabeth Maybrick opened at St George's Hall, Liverpool, on the 31st of July, 1889, before Mr Justice James Fitzjames Stephen. The hall was filled by 9:30 that morning, the public benches crowded with spectators. Among them, the record notes, a considerable number of ladies, and Lord Sefton, Lord Lieutenant of the county, seated upon the bench itself. The prosecution was led by Mr John Addison, Queen's Counsel and Member of Parliament, assisted by Mr McConnell and Mr Swift. The defence was led by Sir Charles Russell, Queen's Counsel and Member of Parliament, assisted by the Liverpool firm of Cleaver, Holden and Company. The jury foreman was recorded as Mr Thomas Wainwright. For 7 days, the court heard evidence. The prosecution detailed the flypapers, the meat juice bottle, the chocolate box, and the intercepted letter to Alfred Brierly, in which Florence had written of her husband being dangerously ill, a letter the prosecution characterized as evidence of premeditation, written while James Maybrick yet lived. The defence countered with the chemist's ledger, with testimony regarding Maybrick's long-standing arsenic habit, and with Dr McNamara's evidence that the post-mortem findings did not, on their own, establish poisoning as the cause of death. Florence Maybrick made an unsworn statement from the dock, permitted under the law of the period, though not subject to cross-examination. She stated that she had soaked the flypapers for cosmetic purposes, having mislaid her usual prescription. She stated, further, that the arsenic found in the meat juice bottle had been added at her husband's own urgent request, in the belief, his belief, not hers, that it would restore his strength. Sir Charles Russell, in his closing address, reminded the jury directly his client stood charged with murder, not with infidelity. It was, by several accounts, a needed reminder. Mr Justice Stevens, summing up, extended across 2 days. Modern review of the transcript shows it began with due attention to the medical evidence, but turned, on its second day, toward an extended consideration of Mrs Maybrick's conduct with Alfred Brierly. Character, the judge suggested to the jury, bore upon capability. The jury retired. They returned in 35 minutes. Guilty. Mr Justice Stephen sentenced Florence Maybrick to death by hanging. It is recorded by a journalist present and corroborated by an account from the period that the judge himself remarked privately before sentencing that the evidence could scarcely support conviction, and that the chief prosecutor inclined his head in apparent agreement. The sentence, nonetheless, stood as pronounced. News of the verdict crossed the Atlantic within days. Newspapers in both Britain and the United States carried extended coverage. Public opinion divided sharply. Petitions for clemency were organized. Legal opinion, increasingly, held that the medical evidence had not established beyond doubt that arsenic was the cause of death at all. 4 days before the date set for her execution, the Home Secretary, Henry Matthews, acting with the Lord Chancellor, issued a formal finding that the evidence established Florence Maybrick had administered poison to her husband with intent to murder, but that reasonable doubt existed as to whether the poison so administered had, in fact, caused his death. On this finding, a verdict reached on a charge for which she had never formally stood trial. Her sentence was commuted to penal servitude for life. She served more than 14 years, first at Woking Prison, later at Aylesbury, including a lengthy period of solitary confinement she would later describe, in her own memoir, as the cruelest feature of her imprisonment. She was released in January of 1904 and returned to the United States, where her citizenship, forfeited upon her English marriage, was restored. She published a memoir, Mrs. Maybrick's Own Story, My 15 Lost Years, and toured the lecture circuit, speaking on prison reform and maintaining her innocence. She never saw either of her children again. Her son, James Chandler Maybrick, became a mining engineer and died in 1911 by accident after mistaking a cyanide solution for water. In later years, Florence withdrew from public life entirely, living as a recluse in a small dwelling in Gaylordsville, Connecticut, under her maiden name, in the company only of cats, her former identity known to few of her neighbors. She died there, alone, on the 23rd of October, 1941, at the age of 79. Her obituary appeared the following day on the front page of the New York Times. Mr. Justice Fitzjames Stephen did not long survive his most famous case. Within 2 years of the trial, his faculties had declined to the point of forced resignation from the bench. He was, by multiple accounts, committed to an asylum where he died in 1894. James Maybrick was laid to rest in Anfield Cemetery, Liverpool, his headstone, in later decades, vandalized and broken in two, following renewed public attention to his name. That renewed attention arrived in 1992 with the emergence of a diary said to have been found beneath floorboards at Battlecrease House, purporting to be a confession written by James Maybrick himself, naming him as the perpetrator of the Whitechapel murders attributed to Jack the Ripper. The diary's authenticity remains, to this date, formally unresolved and widely disputed among historians. A pocket watch, bearing scratched initials, matching several Ripper victims, and the inscription, "I am Jack," surfaced the following year. Forensic dating placed the scratches as consistent with the claimed period, though far from conclusive of it. The file closes as it opened, with a verdict the record itself could not fully justify. Battlecrease House still stands on Riversdale Road, Aigburth, a private residence, its garden walls unchanged since the spring. A household turned upon itself, and a young woman from Alabama was tried in the end, less for what she had done than for who she had been.